Ontario's 16-month-old government brought down its first budget last spring to very mixed reviews. In fact, the finance minister that introduced it didn't survive the cabinet shuffle that came just a couple of months later. Yesterday, we got the government's mid-year assessment of how it's going so far. With us to crunch the numbers and maybe talk a bit of politics too, we welcome, in the nation's capital, Don Drummond, the Stauffer Dunning Fellow in Global Public Policy and adjunct professor at the School of Policy Studies at Queen's University. And here in our studio, Jasmine Pickle, interim Ontario Communications Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and Jeff Gray, Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. And we are delighted to welcome Jasmine, you for the first time to our program. Jeff, you haven't been here in 10 years or so.
A little while.
Long overdue. Don, you're not quite a regular, but it's great to have you back on our program. And can I say, credit needs to be given where it's due. We had a little snow in Toronto, so of course when it snows in Toronto, they call in the army or something like that. You cycled here today, Jeff Gray. That is amazing.
No need to throw me a parade, but yes, I did. I did cycle here.
No parade, but good for you. Let's do this. Sheldon, can I show this to the camera? That's it right there. That is the so-called Fall Economic Statement, 200 pages of what the government says is the state of the books of the province of Ontario right now. They call it a plan to build Ontario together. And Don Drummond, I'll go to you first with your initial feedback. What did you think was the most noteworthy part of the statement for you?
Well, backing off on the edge, strangely enough, characterizing some lower degree of expenditure cuts as actually spending increases. I don't know how you can portray it that way. But pulling back on the numbers and the degree of expenditure cut, but probably more important than that, trying to create some kind of different attitude or sentiment that's not quite as gung-ho, bravo. It's almost like in the beginning they wanted to boast about how tough they were going to be, despite the overly ample record that no public had ever wanted their government to come across that way before, and getting a bad reaction to that, and now trying a softer approach to that. Trying to recover a little bit of credibility in their numbers, but when that goes, credibility is easy lost and hard to get. They so exaggerated the deficit at the beginning, one doesn't really quite know whether we should believe these projections now.
Okay, more on that in a bit. Jasmine, follow up if you would. What was the most noteworthy part of this economic statement for you?
So although the government wants to focus on that they reduced the deficit quicker than they had anticipated in the budget, the only number that stood out to me was that we've increased the deficit by $1.6 billion from what it was last year. So that's about a 22% increase. And from a government who says that they want to approach balance, this is the wrong direction. The deficit is growing. Also, what stood out to us was there are three reasons why the deficit was smaller than it was projected to be. One of those reasons was slightly because of the government spending restraint, but largely it was because of an increase to tax revenue by income tax and corporate tax. And then also the cost of interest wasn't nearly as much because, as you know, our credit rating was restored. It was previously downgraded. So what you'll notice about those three factors that led us to, a smaller deficit than anticipated this year is that they could easily be erased if we were to encounter harsh economic times, which many sources are projecting to come quite shortly. So for us, the biggest issue here is government spending. This, as you pointed out before the show, Steve, there's a lot of similarity even in name to the Kathleen Wynne plan.
Well, should we say
one word
that?
different.
Yeah. Okay, this one's called the Plan to Build Ontario Together. And the previous Liberal government, their slogan was
To build
Ontario up.
And
Not
like
much
I
difference.
said, the title is very similar, but the contents are. This is almost like Kathleen Wynne 2.0 in terms of spending. Spending has reached historic highs. So for us, this really wasn't good news. It showed that the government needs to save more.
Okay. Jeff, your headline on this one.
Yeah, it fits in with their current mode of operation, which is they're trying to play nice. They are trying to fix the problems that they had with the first budget, as you mentioned off the top. This is a government that came in with a new leader, not a lot in the way of transition planning, and they made a whole bunch of moves that I don't think even they understood. Some of them they couldn't explain to us. For instance, the public health funding formula changes seemed to change every day. We didn't really have, it was impossible to find out how much money the City of Toronto was going to get for public health, but they were calling their critics liars and so on, and it got very messy. So they are trying to tap the brakes. For the whole federal election campaign, we didn't see much of the Premier. We had the House on a record, at least for the last quarter century, record break. So they have been tapping the brakes, slamming the brakes, and trying to get things to a state where they are presenting a moderate, more centrist, pragmatic is the word one of them used with me yesterday, trying to look responsible and look like grown-ups.
Rod Phillips is the finance minister in the province of Ontario, and he was the one who gave the economic statement yesterday. And he thinks they've made great progress on the deficit numbers, and here's how he put it. Sheldon, the clip, if you would, please.
Today, I am pleased to report that our government is beating its deficit projection by $1.3 billion for this year. The deficit has been reduced to $9 billion from the $10.3 billion first projected in the 2019 budget. Our government, Mr. Speaker, has adopted a balanced and prudent approach to governing.
Don, is that as big an achievement as the finance minister would have us believe?
Well, it always made me think of the art in golfing called sandbagging, and try to present yourself as a 36 handicap, but it kind of loses credibility if you start parring on the first 9 holes. And so a lot of what they're calling the progress is they exaggerated it. And I think a lot of the false start that they got at the beginning, they expended an enormous amount of effort trying to ex post make the Liberals look bad. A very curious move, because the electorate already did that for them. They gave them, the Conservatives, a mandate, and they basically obliterated the Liberals. I don't know why they bothered to do that. No one believed their original estimates of $15 billion. No one believed the ongoing track on the other years. So yeah, that you're doing better than it. Yeah, so that's what everyone was expecting them to do.
Jeff, math is math. So why would there be any controversy over what the size of the deficit is or ought to be or might be or should have been or whatever?
Well, it's such a tangled tale, because they came out with this $15 billion number originally, and a number of people, including the Financial Accountability Officer, said that that's not the case. And then the government itself has actually acknowledged that that isn't the case, and the number then came down to 11. And then we learned in September that it was actually 7.4 for last year's deficit.
7.4 billion.
So right. So some of that is spending that was going to happen that they canceled. Some of that is the accounting changes, which too complicated to talk about, but have to do with pension assets that there was a dispute over whether they should be included or not, et cetera. So the deficit figures have bounced around a lot, and now we're looking at, they say, 9 for next year, which, as Jasmine points out, is higher than the deficit we already had. And we're talking about a Conservative government that loves to talk about how big the debt is and how they need to reduce the deficit, but actually it's going up.
Let's just confirm this, Jasmine. This government, at the moment, will spend more in this fiscal year than any government in Ontario history. Is that right?
Confirmed.
Confirmed. Why do I then hear opposition politicians all the time say this plan is proof positive that there are still big cuts to come?
So, I mean, obviously, big union bosses and the Prime Minister both had a self-interest in talking about Ford cuts. But as I've said all along, what cuts? And it didn't help that the Premier was hiding under a rock for the past election and couldn't, speak the truth. He essentially ceded all communications ground to the union bosses and to big spending Liberals who were saying he was making cuts. But the reality is, Steve, and he's increased it further here, but even before this economic update, he had increased healthcare spending $1.7 billion beyond what Kathleen Wynne had spent. He's increased education spending $700 million beyond what Kathleen Wynne has spent.
Just in terms of percentages, that's 3% more on health, 4% more on education, which
Yes.
are both running higher than inflation,
And
obviously.
so when these unions and, frankly, the Prime Minister have this irresponsible rhetoric misleading Ontarians that he's cut, it puts me in a very difficult position, because first I have to defend him and say the truth, which is actually he's increased spending. But then I have to say what the reality is, which is that he should be decreasing spending. So there's a lot of miscommunication flying around, which I'm glad that we had, today the chance to clear up. But I don't know why the government hasn't cleared this up themselves.
Jeff, what's your view on whether or not the opposition is on firm ground when they say this is proof that more cuts are coming?
Well, there's going to be lots of, as there has been since Ford was elected, the opposition is going to be jumping up and down and talking about cuts. There are cuts. There are cuts. There are targeted cuts. There are cuts that have occurred. You're correct. They are not large. They are cuts from projections of what spending should have been or would have been, depending on where you stand. And there are some targeted cuts to programs like the legal aid program, for example, where there have been ramifications from these cuts. But So you have the perception and you have the reality, and you have two sides that are not. The real trick, though, is that cuts that are to come. And if you look at those numbers, the out years, there are large, unspecified amounts of money that will need to be found for them to hit their targets.
Because the plan is still to balance the books in 2024.
Right. And we don't know what those cuts are.
So
we don't know.
So still to be determined is a way.
Cuts and we were told tax cuts.
Tax cuts as well.
Too.
Still to come. Okay, Don, I want to get you in on this, and that is there are any number of different ways of determining what the status of the books is. One is to look at the overall deficit number. Government says it's $1.3 billion lower than it used to be. The other way is to look at the debt-to-GDP ratio. And we're going to put up a little chart here just to show everybody how that number has changed over the years. If you go back a long way, let's go back to when Bob Rae was Premier. From Confederation until 1990, essentially the debt-to-GDP ratio was 13.4%. That's a relatively low number. But of course, the recession of the early 1990s really put some holes in that plan, and the debt-to-GDP number went up and up and up. In the Mike Harris years, it flattened out a bit, one spike in the late 1990s, but then essentially started to come down a bit. But then, of course, the Great Recession kicks in 2008, and the number now at 27.9% starts to go up and up and up and up again. And then through the Kathleen Wynne years, it continues to go up to more than 40% debt to GDP ratio. 40 was always considered the magic number for some reason. You didn't want to go higher than 40% debt to GDP ratio. This government is going to have it go over 40% next year again. This year, they're right at 40. Next year, 40.1. Can you tell us, based on that metric, what you consider the state of the books in the province of Ontario to be right now?
Well, first, I don't think 40% is a magic number. It's far too high, and I don't think we need to go back historically to Bob Rae's era. Let's just go back to the year of the financial crisis in 2008. That wasn't very long ago. The net debt to GDP ratio in Ontario then was 26%. It's gone from 26 to 40 in the blink of an eye. If you look at a long-term trend of Ontario, the pattern is very disturbing, very disconcerting. It goes up when the economy goes down. It should then restore to the lower level as the economy recovers, but it never does. It's like a step ladder. It goes up when things are going bad, and then it stays up. So we go from the 26 to 40, and then we get stuck at this 40 level. One of the real harms of this is a lot of taxpayers' money is going to pay interest on the public debt. In fact, 3 times as much as during the Bob Rae era. That's money that's not available for health and education, and that's 3 times as much going to pay interest on the public debt, despite interest rates being a fraction of what they were before. So imagine what's going to happen before. But I think a lot of the problem we're having, and a lot of the problem they're having in communications, is that we're talking about the wrong thing because they're talking about the wrong thing. We shouldn't be talking about the deficits very much. It doesn't really matter if it's 5, 6, 7, or even $10 billion. What matters is that debt-to-GDP ratio, and it needs to come down from that 40% mark. And that means that they're going to have to, at minimum, run balanced budgets for a while, if not for surpluses. But I wanted to come back to your litmus test of whether spending is being restrained or not. It's not whether the level goes down. You're always got about a 2% rate of inflation. We have 1% population growth. If you look at healthcare, the aging of the population adds another 1 percentage point. So you're going to feel some pain on the spending front, even if spending is going up at a fairly modest rate, which means that it is fairly typical that spending in 1 year will be greater than it was before. In fact, there's only a couple of examples where the actual level of spending has gone down. The federal government post-Second World War, for obvious reasons, and a brief period in the 1990s. But, you know, that running at the spending pace that they want will feel, even if they pulled off, that will inflict some cuts in there. But also keep in mind, one of the reasons why for the spending cuts is they have embedded tax cuts into their document and in a highly non-transparent fashion. They have hundreds of pages laying out the assumptions, and they never tell you there's tax cuts in there. But if you look at their revenue projections for personal income tax, you'll notice that it flattens out in 2021. And you notice the so-called other excise tax, which includes the gasoline excise tax, actually falls. That's because I'm quite confident they've embedded the tax cut in there, and the gasoline tax income, that's fine. They got elected on that platform, but it seems kind of sneaky and inappropriate to put that in the document and not say anything about it, and always saying the spending cuts are necessary to balance the budget and address the debt. burden, but in part they're necessary to finance the projected and assumed tax cuts.
Okay, Jasmine, let's just hit this on the head again. If we want to go back, again, 35 years or so when Bill Davis was Premier, the debt-to-GDP ratio was about 12%, and now it's over 40. And help people understand why you think that is of significance.
Well, when you talk about the debt to GDP ratio, which is obviously something that a lot of people are talking about right now, because at the federal level, we saw the federal Liberals, now governing party, abandon any sort of attempt to even balance the budget, and they're justifying their deficits by saying that the debt to GDP ratio is lower than our neighbors. Well, that's a very odd justification, because certainly at the household level, you would never have a family sit around their kitchen table and say, we can afford to make our interest payments, so let's keep spending more. So that's the justification they're using. And as Mr. Drummond pointed out as well, talking about the debt to GDP ratio, everyone that talks about that fails to acknowledge the opportunity cost of the interest payments that we make on our debt every day. So every day we spend $36 million on interest payments on our debt. That's money that could go into, providing those vital social services, or frankly back into the pockets of taxpayers. But every year we spend over $13 billion on interest on our debt in this province, and so that's just money, that taxpayer dollars that are going down the drain. Frankly, the interest that we pay on our debt is the fourth largest line item on Ontario's budget every year.
Health, education, social services, debt interest.
And then colleges and universities. So anybody who purports to be, an advocate for social services in this province, of which I am one, should first and foremost be a fierce advocate of debt reduction. And I couldn't agree, again, more with Mr. Drummond saying everyone's focusing on the deficit. Well, that's a really small picture of a heaping pile of debt. Ontario is the largest subnational debtor on the planet. We waste so much money every year, as I said, on debt interest. We go further into debt, $45 million every day. So if this program, for example, shows, on TV for an hour, in that time we'll have gone into debt $2 million more. Spending is out of control. And frankly, in this update, maybe the government couldn't talk about public sector salaries because they're in the middle of a negotiation process right now, and perhaps it would maybe look like it was of bad faith for them to include plans in there. But that is the single biggest cost to taxpayers in this province, is the cost of our
salaries for public employees.
Yeah, the 1.3 million of them that are employed by the government. And frankly, that's where we need, at a time when Alberta's rolling back the pay of its public servants, its government employees by 5%, and Ontario's offering a 3% raise. I don't see spending going down anytime soon.
Jeff, help us understand this, because the government obviously is portraying itself as good, prudent stewards of the public purse. And yet, we have already seen from that graph, the debt to GDP ratio is at 40%. Next year, the forecast is at 40.1%. It's actually going to go up. How exactly do they make the argument that they're good stewards of the book when the graph is going like that instead of like that?
Yes, well, the graph does conveniently it peaks the year after and starts to go down.
It does.
They also pointed out yesterday that because of better revenue, better economy, the spending restraint that they have brought in, that the rate of incline is lower. They're not going to get up to this 40.8. They've magically decided that's the bad number, not 40.8, and they're going to stay below that, and then they're going to start to come down. And the graph kind of ends there. You've got the graph. You've got the advantage here.
I got the graph. Well, yeah, by
it does start to go down.
Yeah, by fiscal year 2021-22, it starts to go below 40.
And to be fair to them, and of course, we're always fair to them. We're the press gallery at Queen's Park.
Yeah.
I hope they're watching. You can't turn this ship around like in one budget overnight. You can't fix that problem.
It is the Titanic.
It's huge.
Takes a while.
So if the graph is starting to curl and go that way, and they can keep it there, and that's a big challenge, and we don't know how they're going to do it, then they'll deserve some credit at the end for sure.
There's another way to sort of define, or I guess describe, what the state of our indebtedness is today. We talked about the overall deficit number, we talked about the overall debt number, we've talked about debt to GDP ratio. Sheldon, let's bring this graphic up here. Here is our net debt per capita. Mr. and Mrs. Everyday Ontario, this is how much each of you owes in order to pay back everything that governments since Confederation have borrowed. Again, going back to the Bob Rae days, 1990-91, we each owed about almost $3,800 apiece. Go through to the end of the Mike Harris years, and we're up almost around $11,000 apiece. Go to the beginning of the Great Recession, Dalton McGuinty's in power at this point, we're over $13,000 apiece. And now to today, almost $24,000 that each of us is indebted to pay back this money. Now, Don, my question is, interest rates are at historic lows. So it's not like, the Jimmy Carter years when interest rates were at 24%. Interest rates are at next to nothing today. So is the urgency of this problem less significant today, given that fact?
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I think you've seen many governments, including the Ontario government, not take a more aggressive stance at it, because the interest payments have been so low. I don't think we're going to go back into the double-digit interest rates, but they're definitely going to be higher in the future than they are right now, which is a reason you need to deal with it. But in fiscal policy world, you have vicious circles and you have virtuous circles. And Ontario's been locked in this vicious circle for a long time, and your interest payments get so high, it's very hard to first stabilize that debt-to-GDP ratio and then bring it down. And you have to do the kinds of things that they got in trouble for doing in the first year. You have to, if not reduce the absolute level of spending, you have to restrain it what it would normally be. Let's just take healthcare, which is almost half of their spending. Left on its own course to meet the population, the aging, the inflation, they would have to increase 4 to 6% a year. So if they run healthcare spending at 2 or 3%, that's going to hurt. That's going to cause some addition on the wait times and some increase in some operations that just won't be done, some deferral of some expenditures, unless they can figure out how to do it more effectively and more efficiently. And we haven't talked about that. And to the fairness of the government, they are trying to do that. We haven't seen the results of it. It seems to be unorganized. It certainly seemed to be chaotic almost in the first year. But they are looking at things like trying to improve home care to take the load off long-term care. They are looking at things like scope of practice, albeit seem to be a finer minor. That's some of the things that they need to do. But they also need, do we really need all the programs? You talked about all the money for civil servants, but they are delivering programs. Do we need that? Between direct spending and tax preferences, we have $4 billion of assistance and business subsidies. Are they producing positive benefits? I would bet that almost every one of them would produce a negative benefit cost ratio if one were so inclined to do a good analysis of them. You can cut some of those programs and then some of the ancillary costs would go along with it.
Jeff, follow up if you would.
Just on that point about restraint, I mean, they've got a bill that would cap public sector wages, the broader public sector wages at 1%. And they just got to deal with the union that represents all the custodians and secretaries and support workers and in education, where they agreed to that 1% level. So they're not quite at maybe a level that would make Jasmine happy, but they are putting a lid, pretty aggressively putting a lid. The unions do not like the idea of legislating a wage cap, to say the least. Mm-hmm. So they are trying to keep that under control.
Okay, well, let me make you the finance minister for the next minute and a half. Okay, what are you going to do to try to contain the cost curve that you don't like?
Absolutely. So the single biggest cost driver for Ontario taxpayers and for the Ontario government is the cost and size of our public service. It has grown substantially in terms of the average compensation for government employees, and also while from I think it was 1997 to 2017, the Ontario population grew by 25%, but our public service government workers grew by 48%. So they're growing far faster. Ernst & Young just gave us a report analyzing government expenditure, and they said that if simply the Liberal government would have kept spending in line with population growth, we would have spent $331 billion less over the last 15 years. That's almost, as you know, the size of all of our debt. Mm-hmm. So spending per person has increased by $2,200 more on average during the Dalton McGuinty win Liberal years, and taxpayers don't feel like we're getting $2,200 more in benefits. So what's
the prescription then is what? A hiring freeze across the public service?
The government did implement a hiring freeze when they first took office, which we applauded. They offered buyout packages to public service government workers, which again we applauded. But the issue with the bill that's before government right now, Bill 124, so they're offering 3% raises. So it's 1% for the next 3 years. So 3 times 1% is 3% raises, while, as I said, in Alberta, their government workers are getting a 5% pay cut. For every 1% pay increase that our government employees get, taxpayers get a bill for $720 million. And this is debt financed because we don't have any money. So it's either going to be through taxation or debt. And frankly, at a time when an Ipsos poll just came out and showed that 50% of Canadians are $200 away from financial insolvency.
It's a shocking figure.
It is. And at the same time, we're talking about giving our government employees who earn an 11% wage premium over their comparable private sector counterparts, we're talking about giving them a raise. And I'll just finish with this, Steve. On Monday, I was in front of the government committee on the Standing Committee on General Government. They're talking about Bill 124, which is this bill to give government employees a raise. And of the 17 witnesses, I was the only witness there advocating on behalf of taxpayers. The other 16 witnesses were all government unions. So to suggest that these government employees, are not well represented or well taken care of is ludicrous. It's the taxpayers who are suffering, who are the ones on the hook for these expensive raises, and we need the government to stand up for taxpayers.
Well, you may have put your finger on the difficulty here, is that the governments overwhelmingly hear from people who want them to spend more, not less. Don, can I get you to just weigh in on what you just heard from Jasmine?
Well, I think we're looking at the wrong end of the dog. The employees are hired to do something and in a certain way. What we need to look at is what the government does and how it does it. Then you can deal with the number of people. If you stop the programs that are not very effective and are not achieving worthwhile goals in an efficient manner, you won't need as many people. Hiring freeze are a terrible idea. They've backfired on every government that's ever done it. You can see the pain of that right now. We're missing a very important cohort that should be driving good policy in Ontario because of previous hiring freezes. They don't have the group that should be moving into senior management right now in that 35 to 42 year range. They've got the bulk of their senior talent is about to retire, and they have age inversion that the levels under them are actually older than the people that are senior to them, all going back to decisions that they made before. You look at some of these short-term gains, they cut the physicians' pay by 3%. Well, what good did that do? It put everybody offside against them, and the arbitrator gave it right back to them. And amazingly enough, Alberta seems to be contemplating doing something like that. That's not the way of doing it. The way of doing it is looking at what you're spending the money and how you're spending the money on it. And yeah, that will affect some of these things. Like, for example, right back from the beginning of the McGuinty era, not even the resources in the schoolroom, but the resources in the back room of the schools exploded. Why did it do that? That's not efficient. That's not effective. All kinds of other examples. We have so much of the administrative support that drives police services done by uniformed officers that you don't need to be doing it that way. That's the sort of thing that should be looked at. The update says that they're doing it, very short descriptions, and we don't really see a lot in that process. We do know that there is a lot of soul searching going on the organization of health to reorganize it, and these Ontario health teams that may be improved, but surprisingly, they're not even contemplating integrating the doctors into that. So I'm not quite sure how that will work, but we get so many of these knee-jerk pressures. We're getting older, therefore we need 30,000 long-term care beds, but you have to ask yourself, do we really need that, or can we not serve people better by improving our home care? That's the sort of thing we need it. People and the number of people and the salaries will come out of that, but look at what we're spending money on, and look how we're spending it.
Okay, I got to, Jazz, I know you want back in on that for 1 second, but sometimes the best laid plans, as the expression goes, hi.
Hi.
We're really glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
We're just going to sneak right in here. Angela McEwen, who is a senior economist with the Canadian Union of Public Employees. And how was your flight this morning?
It was quite good, if delayed, both in taking off and then at the gate again.
We are delighted you eventually made it to our set in order to participate. And can I just, obviously we've been having a bit of a discussion about the economic statement in your absence. You didn't mind that we started
I
without.
totally understand.
We had to, I'm afraid. Let me get you to react to this right away. So far, the sort of consensus coming out of here is this is a statement that still will spend more money than any government in the history of the province of Ontario, and yet you say there are cuts coming and you are concerned.
Well, because inflation happens every year. So if you're spending in line with inflation and population growth, every year you're going to spend more money almost without taking into account any growth in services or meeting new demands that come up, like the autism services or the long-term care services that Don Drummond was talking about, because we're actually already paying for those people. They're in hospital beds, in acute care beds, sometimes up to years, taking up spots that could be used for other people, and then that causes delays and extra costs all the way down.
How would you convince us, though, that this is a prescription for cuts, which is the line I hear coming out of your side?
Because in order to keep pace with inflation and population growth, spending would need to increase by 3.5%. That's 2.5 times what it increased this year, and it's double what their planned increases are next year would need to increase by double just to keep pace with inflation and population growth. So that's no new services. So if we have people who are getting wage increases at less than inflation, which we are, public servants that are getting paid less than inflation, and that their wage increases are growing at a lower pace than the private sector, their private sector counterparts, even that won't keep us to a place where this doesn't mean people will be laid off or other investments are being laid off. Or class sizes are getting bigger, so we've got fewer teachers, we've got fewer nurses. There's no way, I see in this budget that they're talking about ending hallway medicine, but there's no way with the amount of money that they're spending that they can have any improvements in healthcare, let alone even just maintaining where we were before.
Okay, Jasmine, have at it.
Respectfully. And I've heard this argument forwarded by many teachers, union bosses, and others that...
You keep calling them union bosses. Why do you say that?
Because I had to put up with 16 of them on Monday, as I told you. So the union bosses are saying that just because inflation will be higher than the raises that we're offering, that they're getting a de facto pay decrease. But that ignores the reality that government workers start with a much higher salary to begin with. There are many teachers on the Sunshine List, over 10,500 that I found through a quick search, that are earning more than the average household income with 2 incomes in it. So to say that government workers are getting, not getting raises fast enough ignores the reality that they're already earning an 11% wage premium on their
So actually, if you take a look at people based on age and gender, so what unions do actually is reduce the gender cap for women, and so teaching and nurses are actually overwhelmingly a female profession still. And so if you compare them to their female counterparts in the private sector, they do have a wage premium, but that's because they're not facing the same discrimination in terms of the pay gap that private sector counterparts are. So once you take into effect the gender gap, and the age, public sector workers tend to be older, better educated than their private sector counterparts. That premium actually goes away completely.
The study was of comparable counterparts, though, in the private sector. I mean, you don't have to look
comparable
further.
to a high school teacher, though? In the
A
private
teacher
sector?
at a private school would earn
whose
less.
wages actually come based on what the union negotiates. Private sector teachers love that union teachers bargain higher wages because that's when their wages go up.
Well, when this is the taxpayer who, on average, like we mentioned before you were here, there are an Ipsos poll showed that 50% of Canadians are $200 away from financial insolvency.
And a lot of those are public sector workers.
Of the teachers, of the teachers then that are on the Sunshine List, and there are 10,000 who are going to be now getting a $3,000 raise.
But that's a very small percentage of overall Ontario public sector workers. QP, for example, represents educational assistants. We represent bus drivers. We represent janitors. And so those people are actually getting laid off. They're not getting, they're
Bill
getting 1%
24
cuts.
will cover everyone, even the people on the Sunshine
But
List.
the so-called union
Bill
bosses,
124.
the union bosses that you're talking about actually represent workers that have been getting less than inflation for the past 10 years.
Perhaps they should focus the bill on those workers at the bottom tier.
Okay, moderator jumping in for a second. Thank you. That was quite illuminating, actually. Can I get Jeff in on this? Let me talk small business for a second. They are one of the few specified tax cuts in this economic statement is to see the small business corporate income tax rate lowered from 3.5 to 3.2%. Will cost the Treasury probably $95 million a year by the time it's fully implemented. What do we think of this?
I think it made my story somewhere near the bottom that I wrote yesterday. I mean, it's a pretty. You mentioned you had it's the 10th of a percentage point. I lost track of the numbers there. It's after the decimal place, right?
Correct.
I mean, this is a government that talks about let's cut taxes, let's get out of the way. The standard.
It fulfills
rhetoric.
a promise. They promised to cut the small business tax rate. They did it.
Wow, it's small.
It is small.
$1,500.
It's already so low.
$1,500.
And they're deficit financing a
Yeah.
small business tax cut.
So-
If the Chamber of Commerce is serious about fiscal responsibility, can they seriously say that it's fiscally responsible to cut taxes on deficit financing?
Well, in fact, the Chamber of Commerce was kind of lukewarm about this. There was like, this doesn't go far enough. It's not really. I mean, it's $1,500. So
Exactly. So
thanks,
they wanted
thanks
a
lot.
bigger
That's
cut.
great.
Finance.
Should we give a little equal time to Rod Phillips here? Okay, Sheldon, let's get that second Rod Phillips clip up and rolling now, if you would, please.
To date, our government has taken over 100 actions to cut red tape for business. Ultimately, these and other measures are expected to save business $400 million in compliance costs. Today, our government is also moving forward with our small business success strategy. And, Mr. Speaker, we are also delivering on a key campaign commitment about tax relief for small businesses. We've started by proposing to cut the small business tax rate by 8.7%.
Well, I guess if you do the math, it works. From 3.5 to 3.2 is an 8.7% cut. Your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think I already said that it's already quite low, that tax rate is on businesses that are profitable. And so it doesn't do anything to help struggling small businesses, right? And that when businesses look to invest, they often look for a broader range of incentives, not just the tax rate. So talking about helping people do the paperwork, making it easier to do paperwork, I think that makes sense. But if you're looking to invest, you want a well-trained workforce. You want transit that works. You want affordable housing nearby. And you want healthcare that works for your workers. And so on all of those other fronts, this government is doing nothing.
Dawn, well, they're not doing nothing on transit. They're spending $28.5 billion over the next little while on transit.
Okay, I'm in Ottawa where the LRT doesn't work if you touch the door.
And we actually covered that one last night. Dawn, your view on the small business tax cut. I mean, they would say promise made, promise kept.
Well, let's forget the cut. It's trivial itself. Let's look at the broader picture. We in Canada, not just in Ontario, but in Canada and all the provinces, have decided to give preferential treatment to small businesses over large businesses. Then we keep hearing the story they're the creator of all jobs. And on a gross basis, that is true, but it's not really true on a net basis. Let's face it. We want to create new businesses. We want to create favorable conditions. And by definition, most businesses start out as small. But don't we also want them to continue growing? Larger firms are more productive. They tend to pay higher wages. They pay for more training. They're more likely to do research and development. They're more likely to export. We do want companies to continue to grow. But as we give more and more preferential treatment for small, we create more and more hurdles for them to grow large. It's probably no accident wherever the threshold is for the definition of a small business, we see a conglomeration of corporations staying just underneath it. And we look at different patterns. In the United States, they actually don't create businesses as quite a rapid rate we do, but they continue to grow through their 4th, 5th, and 6th years, and ours tend to plateau or even sell out in that range. There's other factors involved, but I don't see any reason why we've created this two-tier tax system. And we just had a fairly recent study that looked at this. This is not just the preferential on the tax side. They get far preferential treatment on research tax credits as well. And a recent study said that the social cost of that means that we're actually paying more as a society than the benefit of that kind of thing. And this comes back to my point and my objection, really, the debate that the two of your guests just had, really looking at the personnel involved with different things. Think about what you want to do and what objectives you want. And in coming and teaching, we've had this extremely unproductive debate of the size of the classroom where overwhelmingly worldwide experience shows there's not a lot of difference in the results for the students when you're talking in that 23 to 28. Below that, way above that, yes, but you can actually increase the class size summits if you marry that with increased resources for students who have particular needs. And we haven't done that. So we haven't looked at any of the evidence on this and are just having this meaningless debate largely on populist terms, and that is what the preferential treatment for small businesses as well. It's not based on any kind of science of the rates of return or where you want to put your tax system.
We're down to our last minute. Angela, why don't you respond?
Well, we are right now in a position where this government has capped revenue growth and expenditure growth to 1.4% for this year, which is 2.5 times less We need it to be 2.5 times bigger in order just to keep pace. So they're cutting. And where they're cutting is from vulnerable people. So there are fewer educational assistants in classrooms for kids that need it. We have kids with autism that have to stay home because those resources aren't in place with them, which means their parents then have to take bigger loans or quit their jobs. This is the kind of cutting that we're seeing all over the place. And the only places where we've seen it pushed back a little bit is when there's been a huge public outcry in terms of the autism issue, in terms of the QP educational assistants that pushed back on that, in terms of the Francophone University that we saw. So I think this doesn't mean peace in Ontario. This means people are going to have an incentive to make a huge outcry to push back on this because they see it in their everyday life.
I want to thank all four of you for joining us on TVO tonight, helping us better understand what's in a plan to build Ontario together. Don Drummond, Angela McEwen, Jasmine Pickle, Jeff Gray. Thanks so much, all of you, for getting here. Some by cycle, some by flight. Much appreciated, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.